Welcome to Future Trends, where we examine the latest stories, reshaping tomorrow's international dynamics. This week's headlines: Asia facing new Iran war energy shocks, Tigray party restores pre-war government in threat to Ethiopia peace, Vietnam adds to South China Sea island building, Paraguay and Taiwan reaffirm ties, Alaska megatsunami second largest ever. Starting with politics, Tigray party restores pre-war government in threat to northern Ethiopia peace. The Tigray People's Liberation Front move was a challenge to the post-war transitional arrangement created after the 2022 peace agreement. Analysts warn the move could increase tensions between Tigray and Ethiopia's federal government and threaten the fragile peace in northern Ethiopia. Romania's pro-EU government ousted after no confidence vote. The pro-European Union coalition of Prime Minister Balogun has collapsed after a 281-4 vote of no confidence. The Social Democrats, Balogun's allies, sided with the far-right pro-Russian AUR party to oust the Prime Minister. President Dan has begun consultations to form a new government, while political parties debate possible alliances ahead of future elections. Paraguay and Taiwan reaffirm ties. Paraguay's President Peña reaffirmed his country's diplomatic ties with Taiwan during a state visit, despite China urging Asunción to sever relations. Paraguay remains Taiwan's only South American ally. Both sides signed bilateral agreements, including one on AI investment, as Beijing continues pressuring Taiwan's remaining diplomatic partners worldwide. Pro-independence parties rise across Britain. 3 of the UK's 4 nations are set for the first time to be governed by pro-independence parties after elections, which nationalists said marked the death knell of the centuries-old union. A breakup of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland is by no means imminent, and polling showed voters were motivated by factors other than independence, but the outcome is likely to make Britain harder to govern. China announces suspended death sentences for former defense ministers. A military court sentenced Wei Fenghe and Li Shangfu to death with a 2-year reprieve. This means their death sentences will be commuted to life imprisonment after 2 years, without the possibility of sentence reduction or parole, Xinhua reports. Both men were found guilty of bribery and all their personal assets were confiscated. The announcement follows the recent ousting of several top military figures in the country amid a sweeping anti-corruption crackdown. Moving to stories in conflict, Sudan Army says UAE Ethiopia linked to drone attack. Fighting between Sudan's army and the Rapid Support Forces intensified again, including drone strikes on Khartoum airport, part of a barrage that has ended months of relative calm in the capital, 3 years into a civil war. Sudan's military accused the UAE and Ethiopia of involvement in recent drone operations, claims both countries deny. Russian sanctions over Ukrainian children. The European Union has imposed sanctions on 16 individuals and 7 entities in Russia for systematic unlawful deportation of Ukrainian children. Russia is estimated to have deported and forcibly transferred nearly 20,500 Ukrainian children since the war began. Pests spreading disease in Gaza. Rodents, urban weasels and other pests were frequently visible in 80% of sites where displaced families are now living, affecting some 1.45 million people. More than 6 months after the US brokered a Gaza ceasefire deal, there have been little improvement in the humanitarian situation. There are still regular deadly airstrikes in which Israel says it is targeting Hamas, which triggered the Gaza war with its deadly assault on Israel and hostage-taking in October 2023, and has not committed to disarming. Resurgence in Somali piracy. Multiple hijackings mark the highest level of activity in over a decade, targeting vessels along critical shipping routes in the Gulf of Aden. The uptick appears driven by a combination of economic incentives, the spread of pirate bases along the Somali coast, and a security vacuum created by the redeployment of international naval forces towards the Red Sea. The resurgence is also linked to evolving regional dynamics, including growing coordination between al-Shabaab and Yemen's Houthi rebels, which may be strengthening piracy networks and increasing risks to global maritime trade. EU greenlights sanctions on Israeli West Bank settlers. The sanctions had been held up by opposition from Hungary under former Prime Minister Orbán, who was ousted by rival Peter Magyar in last month's election, paving the way for the bloc to move forward. Here's the latest in economics news. Russian economy showing weakness. After posting solid growth throughout much of 2023 and 2024, Russia's GDP contracted year-on-year in both January, negative 2.1%, and February 2026, negative 1.5%, according to official Russian statistics, highlighting growing strains on the economy more than 4 years into the war in Ukraine. Asia braces for a second wave of energy shocks from Iran war. When the war started, governments made difficult trade-offs, saving power at the risk of slowing businesses, prioritizing gas for households at the risk of fertilizer production, and tapping energy stockpiles for temporary relief. But these measures were based on the war lasting only a short time. About 8.8 million people are in danger of being pushed into poverty, and the conflict may cause $299 billion in economic losses to the Asia-Pacific region. The Asian Development Bank announced expanded support for Pacific countries facing energy shortages and climate vulnerability. Bank of England joins other central banks in freezing rate cuts as Iran war hits global economy. It kept its main interest rate on hold at 3.75%, but hinted of hikes to come as policymakers assess the economic impact of the Iran war. Other central banks have also held rates, including the US Federal Reserve, the Bank of Japan, and the European Central Bank, with all opting for no change as they gauge how long the volatility related to the conflict in the Middle East will persist and what the ensuing impact on inflation will be. Singapore and New Zealand signed a deal to keep supply chains open. It would ensure continued trade in goods like food, fuel, medical supplies, and construction materials. The deal commits both countries not to impose unnecessary export restrictions and sets up mechanisms for coordination and information sharing during disruptions. Zimbabwe returning 67 European-owned farms. Nationals to receive the farms come from Denmark, Switzerland, Germany, and the Netherlands, in the move honoring bilateral investment treaties. It is part of broader efforts to secure international debt relief, as global lenders have conditioned assistance on resolving land disputes stemming from Mugabe-era seizures that began in 2000. Now for news and development. Vietnam adds hundreds of acres in South China Sea island building. The new dredging across the disputed Spratlys added 216 hectares, bringing the total area of artificial land reclaimed by Vietnam in the archipelago to about 1,121 hectares. Vietnam's island-building activities had appeared to be catching up to rival China's in early 2025, but new Chinese reclamation activities at Antelope Reef have widened the gap, with China's totals now about 2,209 hectares of artificial land and 2,519 hectares of reef destruction. Global perceptions of US fall below Russia. The US was also most frequently named in response to which country posed the greatest threat to the world, after Russia and Israel, according to the Denmark-based Alliance of Democracies Foundation, which commissioned the survey. Somalia faces severe malnutrition crisis as WFP warns of aid halt. The World Food Programme has warned that Somalia is facing a rapidly deepening malnutrition crisis, with at least 6 million at risk of acute hunger. Aid agencies say funding gaps could force major reductions in food assistance by mid-year, while consecutive poor rainy seasons and conflict have devastated agricultural output and livestock. Macron push for new France-Africa partnership. President Macron will showcase France's policy for the continent at the Africa Forward Summit, which is expected to draw reactions to the withdrawal of French troops from West Africa that was completed last year amid France's waning regional influence in recent years. Rising US sanctions on Cuba. The Cuban foreign minister called the additional sanctions a collective punishment of a genocidal nature. The island is also facing a worsening humanitarian crisis that Cuban officials have blamed on a US energy blockade, which prevents oil suppliers from serving the island. Finally, our social news. Alaska megatsunami was second largest ever recorded. An incredible 64 million cubic meters of rock, the equivalent of 24 Great Pyramids, splashed into the water below. The sheer power of that amount of rock falling into the fjord in under a minute created a gigantic wave, almost 500 meters tall. Mexico City sinking so quickly it can be seen from space. Mexico City is sinking by nearly 25 centimeters a year, according to new satellite imagery released this week by NASA, making it one of the world's fastest subsiding metropolises. One of the world's most sprawling and populated urban areas, at 7,800 square kilometers and some 22 million people, the Mexican capital and surrounding cities were built atop an ancient lake bed. Many downtown streets were once canals, a tradition that continues in the rural fringes. Mutation gave humans speech. Some mice have it too. A new study on singing mice suggests that relatively small changes in brain wiring may have played a major role in the evolution of human speech. Researchers found that the mice, known for their rapid, conversation-like vocal exchanges, had stronger neural connections between brain regions involved in hearing and vocal control, which is the same mutation believed to have paved the way for the development of human language. Pentagon releases first batch of secret UFO files. The Pentagon released over 160 previously classified UFO files, some dating to the 1940s, documenting reported sightings of unidentified aerial phenomena collected by the FBI, NASA, and State Department. The release follows an executive order by President Trump directing federal agencies to declassify UFO-related records. France to return artworks to African nations. French President Macron enacted legislation to simplify the return of artworks acquired between 1815 and 1972 during the colonial era to their countries of origin, including Algeria, Mali, Ivory Coast, and Benin. France still holds tens of thousands of artworks and other prized artifacts, which Macron pledged to return in a speech to young Africans in Burkina Faso in 2017. That's your Future Trends update for this week. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time with more stories reshaping our world.